Stone Brothers production.
Hello, welcome back to the serial killer series. This first part will be about 10 serial killers in Florida, so let's begin. Number 10. Bernard Eugene Giles. Bernard was declared a mentally disturbed sex offender at his first murder trial, and they sent him to a state hospital until he had been cured by psychiatrists. Bernard, who already confessed to one slaying, but on August 14, 1974, he pleaded guilty to killing 4 other young women. He confessed to a total of 5 slayings of young women in the Titusville area in Florida, and the decomposed bodies were found in a 2-month period before he confessed to these crimes. He received 4 life sentences in 1974 for 4 of the women. Bernard also received his 5th life sentence for the 5th woman in 1977. He also got another 15 years for armed robbery and an attempted rape on a Cocoa woman. Number 9. James Cody. James committed his first known murder in Dade County, Florida on June 13, 1971. The victim was his roommate, 40-year-old Robert Anderson, which he served 11 years on that conviction of murder and robbery. He was released on parole in August of 1982. James moved north to Morristown, New Jersey from the state's permission because he was a parolee, but he only lasted 2 months before his murderous tendencies came back. On November 23, 1982, Amy Hoffman, a high school cheerleader, was kidnapped from Morristown shopping mall, fatally stabbed in the chest and back with a long knife. Her body was discovered in a water tank on Thanksgiving Day, and a witness described her abductor, but the police had no suspect in sight for 12 days. Deirdre O'Brien was snatched from her car 20 miles from Morristown, where she was raped, stabbed, and left for dead, but she lived long enough to describe her attacker as resembling a truck driver. 2 months later, on the night of January 16th, James phoned the police in Morristown, complaining that he was stopped by an unknown assailant and stabbed in the back while driving through Morris Township, which is a quarter-mile from the scene of O'Brien's murder. Authorities checked James' car as part of their investigation, and the investigators noted that his tires matched tire tracks discovered at the latest murder location in the area. A further search turned up more evidence to warrant his arrest, and held him on a $250,000 bail for O'Brien's death on May 12th. On October 29th, he became the first man to receive the death sentence under New Jersey's revised capital punishment statute. James' death sentence was commuted to a life sentence in May of 1985. Number 8. Donald Devore. Nothing much is known on Devore's early life. On the afternoon of July 15, 1982, the postman working Henry Drive noted that the mail at Edward's home had not been taken in for several days. It made the mailman curious, but not wanting to know why. It wasn't until he became aware of a foul odor coming from his house itself, so he decided to phone police and they forced the door open. One of the policemen on the call found Ed Wise, age 47, and his lover, 44-year-old John Stinson, shot and stabbed to death. The medical examiner declared them dead for at least a week to 10 days. Another victim identified police was called in by a young man on a motorcycle in Orlando, partially covered by an orange blanket. When police arrived, they saw the victim was shot twice, which was once in the head and once in the back with a .25 caliber pistol. On October 10th, 3 gunmen tried to rob a local fast food restaurant, and one of them was captured near the scene. The man was a clumsy thief named Donald Devore, who was the brains behind the robbery, and he bragged about killing a dozen people altogether. Homicide investigators were searching for Devore when the robbery happened, and they were startled by the news of his arrest in Jackson, Mississippi 4 days after the attempted robbery. He was charged with a double murder in Mississippi for the stabbings of Danny King, age 32, and 34-year-old Earl Peoples. Both men had been slain in their apartment together, and there were indications that the victims might have been gay too, like the previous double murder. Devore was convicted on Peoples' murder on March 31, 1983, and received the death sentence by electric chair in Mississippi. In Florida, he received the death penalty on July 3, 1983 for Miller's slaying in Orange County. Also, he received 2 more life sentences, one for the slaying of Edward Wise, which was an Orange County man who was robbed and shot, and the other life sentence in Mississippi for Peoples' lover Danny King. Devore was supposedly deceased on November 1, 2014 from when I looked him up on the Florida Department of Corrections inmate search, but I couldn't find anything on his cause of death. Number 7. Michael Durocher. Michael Durocher was a serial killer who killed 5 victims from 1983 to 1988 in the Duval County area of Florida, which his method of murder was shooting or beating to death. This ruthless man killed a 6-month-old son, Joshua, his girlfriend Grace Reed, her 5-year-old daughter Candace, a male store clerk, and his roommate. In one of Durocher's letters, he mentioned that his girlfriend Mrs. Reed had lied about Joshua being their child, that made her being a nuisance and needed to be eliminated. He said he shot her and the little boy in the back and stabbed the other little baby girl. He got the death sentence in 1991 for the 3 murders of his family members and a store clerk, and then 1 life sentence for beating his roommate to death. Michael Durocher was executed 2 years after on August 25, 1993 because of being for the death sentence and begging the governor to sign his death warrant, and wrote that justice can be served for what he has done. Number 6. Edwin Bernard Caprat III, aka the Granny Killer. Edwin worked as a handyman who was known to be very violent towards his wife, neighbors said. Edwin worked in the Hernando County area with his father, where most of his murders took place on elderly women. Edwin's first murder took place on the Tampa Highway 2 years before the 4 murders of elderly women took place. He was not convicted of the murder, but was convicted only using the dead man's credit cards and served prison until mid of 1993. He then moved in with his sister, where he did odd jobs around the neighborhood of Brooksville in Hernando County. This is when Edwin took a dark path that he could not stop due to his violent past. His first official murder occurred on August 7th when 80-year-old Sophia Garrity was found dead in her home from a fire caused by an electric shortage. Investigators reached the same conclusion when 70-year-old Ruth Goldsmith's burned body was found in her mobile home the following day. Edwin's third victim was a friend of Goldsmith, who was named Lydia Riddell, who died in a similar fashion as the other 2 victims on September 2nd. Police finally had to break an investigation when they found fingerprints in the victims' homes, and the fact that Edwin was at a memorial service for one of his victims. He was finally questioned after receiving a tip for Edwin being the killer, who was a friend of his parents. He quickly confessed talking about the gruesome act he had done on one of his victims, which was Lorraine Dow. He stated that he stepped on her neck and broke her neck to put her out of her misery because she was having a heart attack. He was on trial for his crimes, which did not last long after he was stabbed in the prison yard by an inmate, after only being in jail for 6 months. Number 5. William Mansfield Jr. William is the oldest son of a Florida child molester, and he is in line with his father after starting off with a 1-year sentence for a sex crime in Michigan. He was paroled in March of 1980, and he returned to his family home near Tampa, which was a 6-acre junkyard. His first murder victim was Renee Sandling, age 30, and was last seen alive when she left a California tavern with Mansfield on December 6, 1980. The next morning, she was discovered in a drainage ditch with a bullet punctured in her, and police warranted an arrest for William Mansfield. William was captured days later with his brother Gary Mansfield in Winnemucca, Nevada. He was charged with first-degree murder, and his brother was accused as an accessory for helping him escape. On March 16, 1981, Hernando County deputies went to his family's home having warrants to search the premises. 3 bodies were discovered in the family's home after his arrest, which 2 of them being unidentifiable to this day. He was considered a suspect of Melinda Harder, which was a neighbor of Williams, when she disappeared on July 27, 1980. Carol Barrett, a Ohio native, was abducted from her Daytona Beach motel room in 1980 and was shot to death, and her body was dumped near a highway in Jacksonville. Mansfield fit the description for a killer, but eyewitnesses could not make out a positive ID. Neither his mother and father were implicated in the series of murders, even though his mother claims total ignorance of the corpses planted 40 feet from her home. Ultimately, William was sentenced to 25 years to life in California and pleaded guilty to 4 murders in Florida. Number 4. Flat Tire Murders. Flat Tire Murders refer to 5 possible murdered victims that were linked and unsolved in Dade County, Florida in 1975. Investigators on the case theorized that the killer deflated the tires of victims, which were all women, and the suspect offered assistance before killing them. One of the sergeants on the case theorized that the suspect acted alone, moving coast to coast, and supposedly thought the suspect being responsible for 30 unsolved murders. According to the police, they thought the suspect likely being very intelligent with an above IQ average because of hiding his tracks very well. The method of killing was a combination of shooting, stabbing with an ice pick, and blunt force trauma with a hammer. 3 of the possible victims could not be identified because of the severe disfiguration. The flat tire murders remain unsolved to this day, even though police are still investigating the case as recent as 2012 from what I found. Number 3. Aileen Wuornos. Aileen was born to a mother that had her at a very young age, and she never met her father because of her parents divorcing before she was born. Her father hung himself in prison in 1969 after being convicted of a sex crime against a child, which he also had schizophrenia. She had a very bad childhood because of her mother abandoning her at the age of 4 years old, and her alcoholic grandfather took her in for adoption. He would sexually assault Aileen a lot when she was a child and got pregnant from an accomplice of her grandfather at the age of 14. By the age of 11, she engaged in many sexual activities for drugs and food because of having a terrible childhood. After having her kid at the age of 15, she placed him up for adoption, and her grandfather threw her out of the house by age of 15 after her grandmother passed away. After Aileen was thrown out, she supported herself as a sex worker living in the woods near her old home. She started very early for criminal activity, being 18 after being arrested for DUI, disorderly conduct, and firing a .22 caliber pistol from a moving vehicle. Aileen continued to do similar crimes and robberies until November of 1989 when she committed her first murder. Aileen's first victim was Richard Mallory, age 51, was a convicted rapist whom she claimed he had tried raping her, and she killed him in self-defense. In December of 1989, his body was found several miles away from his abandoned vehicle by a Volusia County deputy. Richard was shot several times, which 2 bullets were found in his left lung. She continued to kill 6 more victims in a similar style with a small caliber weapon. She had a girlfriend that was with her a lot, but not during her murders, but she did know of the murders because of being in one of the victims' cars. On January 9, 1991, Aileen was arrested on an outstanding warrant in the Last Resort Biker Bar in Volusia County. Police located Moorer the next day in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and she agreed to try to get a confession out of Aileen for not getting jail or prison time. Moore went with the police back to Florida, and she called Aileen multiple times pleading for help to clear her name from the crimes. She eventually confessed to the murders the next day and claimed the men tried raping her, so she killed all of them in self-defense. By 1993, Aileen received a total of 6 death sentences. She wasn't convicted on Peter Symes because of never finding his body, but his car was the only thing found with her palm prints on it. Aileen was executed by lethal injection on October 9, 2002. Number 2. Daniel Rolling, aka the Gainesville Ripper. Rolling had a tough childhood, and his father told him he didn't want him to be born. His father also abused his mother a lot, trying to hospitalize her by making her cut herself with a razor blade supposedly. One day, Rolling's father handcuffed him and then had other cops take him away because he mentioned he was embarrassed to have him as a son. As a teenager and a young adult, he was arrested several times for robberies in Georgia and caught spying on cheerleaders getting dressed. In May of 1990, he attempted to kill his father during an argument, which his father lost his eye and ear. In the month of August of 1990, Rolling murdered 5 students, 1 being from Santa Fe College and 4 being from the University of Florida during a robbery spree in Gainesville, Florida. He mutilated his victims' bodies, decapitating 1, and then posed them sometimes using mirrors. In the early morning of August 24th, 2 of the victims, 1 being 17-year-old university freshman Sonia Larson and Christina Powell, which they both shared an apartment together. Rolling first saw Powell sleeping on the couch downstairs, so he decided to walk upstairs to not wake her up, and found Larson sleeping in her bedroom. Rolling taped Larson's mouth to prevent her to wake up Powell, and then he stabbed her to death, which she died trying to defend herself. Rolling then went downstairs, taping Powell's mouth shut, then he tied up her wrist behind her back, threatening her with a knife as he was cutting off her clothes. He then raped her and stabbed her 5 times in the back. Before he left, he posed the victims in a sexually provocative positions and left the scene of the crime. One of his more prolific murders was a day later after the 2 murders, which was 18-year-old Krista Hoyt. Rolling broke into her home and hid into the apartment waiting for her to return home. Rolling tied her up and raped her like the previous victim and stabbed her in the back, rupturing her heart. After that, Rolling decapitated her body and posed her head on the shelf looking at her corpse to scare whoever discovered her. After that murder, it brought a lot of media attention, scaring many students who lived in the area. He continued to kill in the same fashion, but made a mistake in the late 1990s when he was arrested on a burglary charge, which investigators saw that his tools matched the description of the Gainesville murder scenes. After he was arrested, police in Louisiana alerted authorities in Florida to an unsolved triple murder in November of 1989. Detectives mentioned there were similarities between the Gainesville murders, which 3 of the victims were mutilated and posed like the other 5 victims in Florida. Rolling was later charged with several counts of murder in November of 1991. Rolling was finally brought to trial nearly 4 years later, and he claimed his motives was to become a superstar like the infamous Ted Bundy. Rolling pleaded guilty to all his crimes before the trial could get underway, and he was sentenced to death on all 5 murders in Florida. Rolling was executed by lethal injection on October 25, 2006. There was a written statement before his execution stating that he confessed to the triple murder in Louisiana. Number 1. Bobby Joe Long, aka the classified ad rapist. Bobby was picked a lot as a kid because of being born with an extra X chromosome, which he grew breasts during puberty. Also, he suffered many head injuries as a child. Bobby had a weird relationship with his mother because he slept in her bed until he was a teenager and resented her multiple boyfriends. Prior to Bobby's Tampa Bay area murders, Long committed at least 50 rapes and was known as the classified ad rapist. In 1984, Bobby Long, during an 8-month period, binded and raped and killed 1 person a week during that time. He would dump the bodies in unusual positions and poses. The first victim from Bobby's murder was discovered in May of 1984 when a Hillsborough County sheriff was called to the crime scene of a nude woman. This started an intense investigation into the rape and murder of at least 10 women in 3 counties of Florida, which was Hillsborough, Pasco, and Pinellas counties. In 1984, he was on probation for assault during his murder spree and would drive around areas that had prostitution. After he would pick up his victims, he would then bring them to his apartment and bind up his victims. He said he would then get sadistic pleasure by raping and brutally murdering his victims by cutting their throats or bashing them to death. Long's 10 known victims were 5 prostitutes, 2 exotic dancers, 1 factory worker, 1 student, and 1 had an unknown occupation. At the time of his capture, Long was wanted by 3 jurisdictions in the Tampa Bay area, which they collected forensic evidence including clothing, carpet fibers, semen, ligature marks, and rope knots. Bobby Long was arrested on November 16, 1984, which he was charged with sexual battery and kidnapping of Lisa McVeigh. Lisa McVeigh got him arrested in the end because he released his victim after raping her for a period of 26 hours, and she went straight to the police providing information to track him down. It took a while to get Long to confess about the 8 murders in Hillsborough and 1 in Pasco County because he declined to answer a lot of questions until he couldn't find any attorneys to help him. Bobby Long received 33 life sentences, and 26 of the life sentences being without the possibility of parole. In addition, in July of 1986, he received the death penalty by electric chair for the murder of Michelle Sims in the Tampa trial. In total, according to the Florida Department of Corrections, Long had received 1 5-year sentence, 4 99-year sentences, 28 life sentences, and 1 death sentence. We can say he'll never get released even though he got 1 death sentence for Virginia Johnson acquitted during an appeal. Thanks for watching the video. Please like, share, and subscribe. And sorry about the wait, I've been really busy with work lately. I'm currently writing for part 2 in the Florida serial killers, so stay tuned for that, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.